They said she was just an old woman with a broken past, and that her horse was nothing but a ragged stray. But when the arena lights came on and the music began, they witnessed something that made the entire crowd weep. What Dusty did next wasn't just a performance, it was a resurrection. The wind over Flagstaff, Arizona always carried a certain melancholy, like it remembered stories even the people had forgotten. In the late afternoon light, the red rocks outside town gleamed like ancient embers, casting long shadows across the dry, cracked soil. The old Calhoun Ranch sat at the edge of the pine forest, where the wilderness met forgotten dreams. The wind whistled through the broken slats of the barn, and dust curled like smoke across the gravel driveway. Summer was ending, but the heat still clung to the air like a stubborn memory. Sawyer Calhoun pulled her truck up the slope with a groan of the engine and a long trail of dust. She cut the ignition, rested her weathered hands on the steering wheel, and took a moment before stepping out. At 56, Sawyer wore her years like armor, tall and lean, with a wiry strength that had once served her in combat zones. Her face was a map of sharp cheekbones, crow's feet, and quiet defiance. Her eyes, a pale storm gray, saw everything but gave nothing away. Her long ash-brown hair was tied into a tight braid, streaked with silver like threads of frost and desert clay. She dressed plainly. Faded jeans, a tan canvas shirt rolled at the sleeves, and scuffed boots that had walked across more countries than most folks could name. To the locals, she had always been a bit of a mystery. A woman with a past, though no one could say for sure what that past was. Some said she'd flown medevacs under enemy fire. Others whispered about a failed marriage or a daughter lost to drugs. None of it was exactly true, but none of it was exactly false either. Sawyer stared at the farmhouse. Time had not been kind. The porch sagged under its own weight. One shutter hung loose on the second-floor window, creaking as the wind nudged it back and forth like an impatient ghost. The front door was sun-bleached and split from decades of neglect. She walked slowly toward it, keys jangling like distant bells. A small, hand-carved sign still clung beside the doorframe, half obscured by peeling paint. Calhoun Ranch, S. 1921. Her grandfather had carved it. Her father had refused to repaint it. She reached up and touched the edge of the wood, trailing her fingers over the initials her younger self had scratched into the corner, barely legible now. SC inside, the house smelled of dust, dry wood, and old paper. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, casting golden veins across the hardwood floor. The furniture was mostly covered in white sheets, ghostly shapes draped over memories. She left them untouched. The sound of footsteps on gravel caught her ear. She stepped back outside, shielding her eyes against the late sun. "Didn't think you'd come back," said a voice, deep and calm like worn leather. Standing by the fence line was Arlo Finch, her old neighbor. Now in his early 70s, Arlo was a stocky man with wide shoulders, a bristly gray beard, and kind eyes set deep under bushy brows. He wore a sweat-stained cowboy hat and a denim vest over a checkered shirt, sleeves rolled just high enough to reveal sunburned forearms. In his hands was a small bucket of nails, and his boots were covered in red clay. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a Marlboro ad, only older, wiser, and sadder. Sawyer nodded once. "Didn't think I would either." Arlo leaned on the fence. "Looks like the old place missed you." She glanced over the land, scrubbed grass, collapsed fencing, and overgrown corral. "Doesn't look like it missed anybody." He chuckled, low and dry. "This town doesn't forget, just pretends real hard." There was a long silence. Sawyer knew Arlo had served in Vietnam. They'd bonded once, long ago, over the unspoken understanding that came from seeing too much and saying too little. They had been close, maybe too close, but that was before she'd left for the Air Force, before she'd buried herself in duty, and eventually disappeared. "People talk," Arlo said after a moment. "They always do. They say you lost someone," he added gently. Sawyer didn't flinch. "Everyone loses someone." Arlo nodded, not pushing. "Well, if you need anything, I'm still just across the ridge. Still fix fence posts and rescue old goats." "Same old Arlo," she said, and for a flicker of a second, something like a smile tugged at her lips. He hesitated, then asked, "You gonna stay this time?" She looked out at the barn. "Don't know yet." The wind picked up again, lifting small dust devils across the yard. In the distance, the sun dipped low, casting the trees in silhouette. Shadows stretched across the land like fingers reaching for something lost. That night, Sawyer sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee, watching the last light fade. Coyotes howled somewhere beyond the tree line. In the barn, something shifted, maybe a loose board or a squirrel, but it sounded bigger than it should have been. She didn't investigate. Not yet. Her mind drifted to places she had left behind: Kandahar, Kabul. The sharp white tents, the screech of metal on tarmac, the endless hiss of sand against everything. The memory of a stretcher stained red, a letter she never sent, a name she could no longer say out loud. Some nights, she still heard the rotors overhead, still tasted the copper in the air, still saw her hands shaking, stained with someone else's blood. She closed her eyes, let the wind pass over her like a prayer. The land remembered her, even if the people didn't. That would have to be enough for now. It came without warning. The Arizona sky had been cloudless all morning, the sun beating down on the high desert like it had something to prove. But just after noon, the horizon shifted. The clouds rolled in like cavalry across the distant plateaus, low, dark, and moving fast. By late afternoon, Sawyer was on her way back from town with a bag of tools and 2 jugs of kerosene in the bed of her truck when the first drops struck her windshield like pebbles. She had taken the old Forest Road 194 instead of the highway. It was slower, bumpier, but it gave her a better view of the land she once called home. She hadn't meant to slow down when she saw the shape, but her foot eased off the gas instinctively. Lying in a ditch at the edge of a barbed wire fence was a horse. No saddle, no bridle, no brand, just skin, bones, and blood. Sawyer braked hard, gravel spraying behind her, and stepped out into the rising wind. The rain had begun in earnest now, soaking through her shirt as she approached. The horse didn't move. Its chest barely rose, sides heaving with the labored rhythm of something too tired to die but too broken to live. It was a young stallion, maybe 5 years old by her estimate. Medium build, though hard to tell with the starvation. His coat was once a light silver gray, but now mottled with dirt, old blood, and layers of wind-blown red dust. His mane was tangled, caked with burrs and mud. One of his front legs was swollen, a gash running from knee to hoof, the skin crusted and torn. Sawyer crouched down, the rain dripping from her hat brim. The stallion opened one eye, and in that single glance, clouded, weary yet defiant, she saw it. Not the panic of a cornered animal, not the surrender of a broken one, but the distant flicker of something still alive, something proud. "I know that look," she whispered. She didn't question herself. Training kicked in, the kind of decisions you didn't think about, just acted on, like pulling someone from burning wreckage. She moved fast, unfastened the rope from behind her seat, fashioned a loose halter, talked gently as she slipped it around the horse's head. He flinched once, nostrils flaring, but didn't bite, didn't pull, just blinked slowly like he was too far gone to care. The ramp to her trailer was shaky at best, but she eased him toward it, one trembling step at a time. When his injured hoof hit the wood, he groaned and paused, sweat and rain streaking his flank. Sawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, and for reasons she couldn't explain, he leaned into her palm like a child would a mother's knee. "Come on," she murmured. "I got you." By the time she rolled back into the Calhoun ranch, the storm had fully broken. Wind howled through the pine trees and the rain stung like needles. Thunder cracked overhead as she backed the trailer into the barn. She opened the doors and the stallion stumbled out onto the hay-strewn floor, collapsing almost immediately with a ragged exhale. For hours, she worked. Stripped his coat of thorns and blood, cleaned the wound with antiseptic, bandaged the leg. She hadn't touched field dressing since Afghanistan, but the muscle memory was still there. The angle of pressure, the rhythm of her breath, the way she hummed under her breath without realizing. The storm raged into the night. Candles flickered in mason jars hung from old nails in the beams. She laid out blankets for warmth, brought over an old trough with water and mashed alfalfa. The stallion didn't eat at first, just lay there, sides rising and falling, his eye watching her as if uncertain what to make of her presence. "You're a stubborn one," she said. "So am I." She sat beside him in the straw, back against the stall post, knees pulled up. The barn smelled of rain-drenched wood, hay, iodine, and something older, like the breath of forgotten things. Around midnight, he lifted his head, looked at her. For a moment, their gazes locked again. No fear, no aggression. Just two beings too exhausted to be anything but honest. The next morning, the sun returned, unapologetic and bright. Sawyer stood at the paddock fence with a coffee mug in hand. She'd managed a few hours of sleep on the barn floor. The stallion still hadn't stood, but he drank water and took a few mouthfuls of feed. "I need to call you something," she said aloud. The red dust had stained his wet coat, giving him a strange, smoky hue under the gray. "Dusty," she said. "Yeah, you look like a Dusty." Dusty. A name for something worn, weathered, but still here. Still holding on. She turned as a familiar pickup rolled up the drive. Arlo Finch stepped out, this time with someone in the passenger seat. A woman emerged, mid-30s, wiry and sun-tanned, her auburn hair pulled into a messy bun under a ball cap that read Flagstaff Feed and Supply. Her face was angular, with freckles splashed across her cheeks and a perpetual furrow in her brow, like someone who expected to be disappointed but kept showing up anyway. "This is Ray Maddox," Arlo introduced. "She's a vet tech, used to work with Mustang rescues before her place shut down." Ray offered a curt nod. "Arlo said you picked up something rough." "In the storm yesterday," Sawyer replied. Ray grabbed her kit from the truck bed and crossed the paddock. "Let's see what we're dealing with." She moved with the confidence of someone used to working with wild things. No wasted motion, no sharp sounds. Within minutes, she had Dusty's temperature, pulse, and pupil reaction checked. She examined the leg wound, whistled low. "He's lucky it didn't go septic." "You cleaned it up right," she said, glancing at Sawyer. "Where'd you learn field treatment?" "Air Force," Sawyer said simply. Ray nodded, approving. "He's dehydrated, underfed, and possibly an old tendon sprain along with the laceration. But he's strong. Got that don't touch me vibe, but I've seen worse. He might just pull through." She scribbled some notes on a wrinkled pad. "I'll come back tomorrow with antibiotics. You got shelter, food?" "I got just enough," Sawyer replied. Ray gave her a long look. "If he makes it, it's 'cause he wants to. Horses are like people that way. They choose whether to give up or not." As Ray climbed back into the truck, Arlo lingered. "Storm's over," he said, nodding to the sky, "but something tells me the story's just getting started." The morning Ellie arrived, Flagstaff was cloaked in one of those peculiar autumn silences. Still, amber-hued, and waiting. The leaves clung to the last of their golden hues before giving in to the wind, and the air held a crispness that whispered of change. The gravel crunched beneath the wheels of a gray hatchback as it pulled up to the weathered gate of the Calhoun Ranch. Sawyer stood at the porch, arms crossed, eyes narrow against the rising sun. Ellie Mae Davenport stepped out of the car, clutching a worn canvas backpack in one hand and a sketch pad under the other arm. She was small for 14, with a wiry frame, long limbs, and untamed strawberry blonde hair that tumbled in awkward waves to her shoulders. Her green eyes were guarded and restless, set beneath arched brows that gave her a perpetually skeptical expression. She wore black jeans with frayed knees, a soft olive-green hoodie, and high-top sneakers that had seen better days. The woman who brought her, a caseworker named Denise Hall, gave Sawyer a tight smile. Denise was in her early 40s, with neat auburn hair and a professional calm that came from years of navigating grief-stricken families. Her voice was low and soothing, but there was an edge to it. A weariness, perhaps, from watching too many stories unravel. "She doesn't talk much," Denise said softly. "Hasn't since her mom passed." Sawyer nodded once. "I don't talk much either." They exchanged paperwork on the porch. Ellie lingered by the car, head bowed, fingers gripping the corner of her sketch pad so tightly her knuckles whitened. Denise gave her one last look and touched her shoulder gently. "You'll be okay, kid." Ellie didn't respond. After the car disappeared down the dirt road, an uneasy quiet settled over the porch. Sawyer glanced at Ellie, then down at the two bags at her feet. "Well, you want to come in or just draw the house from here?" Ellie didn't smile, but she walked past Sawyer into the house with soft, soundless steps, like she was afraid to disturb the dust. The inside hadn't changed much. Sawyer had cleared the sheets from the furniture in preparation and made up the guest room as best she could, even if the ceiling fan still rattled like old bones. Ellie entered the room without a word, placed her backpack neatly on the floor, and sat at the desk by the window. She opened her sketch pad immediately and began to draw. Sawyer didn't interrupt. She simply leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, observing. The girl's strokes were fast but deliberate, long lines and curves shaping into something unseen. Later that afternoon, the wind shifted again, bringing the scent of pine and distant rainfall. Sawyer found Ellie behind the barn, seated cross-legged in the straw near the paddock. Dusty was there, dozing in the sun, his coat finally beginning to regain a soft sheen beneath the layer of dust. The stallion stood near the fence, not close enough to touch, but not far either. Ellie was sketching him. Her pencil danced across the page in smooth, precise movements. His arched neck, the jagged scarring on his leg, the eyes half closed in drowsy confidence. She hadn't noticed Sawyer watching until the woman spoke. He doesn't let most people near him. Ellie blinked but didn't reply. Her gaze remained on Dusty. I named him Dusty, Sawyer added. Found him during that storm a week back, half dead. Ellie's pencil slowed. She looked up at the horse, then down at her sketch. A whisper, barely audible. He doesn't feel dead. Sawyer arched a brow. No, he doesn't. That evening, while making cornbread and chili, Sawyer noticed Ellie hovering in the kitchen doorway, sketch pad still in hand. Without a word, the girl placed it gently on the table, then slipped away. Sawyer opened it. Dozens of sketches filled the pages, every one of Dusty, standing, resting, walking, even flinching mid-sleep. There were no captions, no words, just imagery, but each one carried emotion, pain, dignity, something untamed but yearning. One page stopped Sawyer short. It showed Dusty standing by the barn, head low as a second figure leaned against his shoulder. It was a woman, broad-shouldered, hair in a braid, scar on her hand. It was Sawyer. And the way Dusty looked at her in the sketch, it wasn't just loyalty, it was recognition. Over the following days, Ellie spent nearly every waking hour with Dusty. She didn't approach him directly, but sat within sight, reading, sketching, or just watching. And gradually, the stallion began to draw near. Sawyer, observing from a distance, noticed something else. Dusty responded to Ellie in ways that were strange. When she stood and took a single step left, he mirrored her, one cautious hoof placed just so. When she paused, he paused. When she blinked slowly at him, he dropped his head and licked his lips, a sign of trust among horses. One afternoon, Ray Maddox returned to check on Dusty. She watched Ellie and the stallion for several quiet moments before speaking. She got some kind of connection, that one, Ray said. He moves with her, not like he's trained, more like he listens. Sawyer leaned against the fence, squinting toward the paddock. I've worked with horses most of my life, never seen one act like this. Ray shrugged. Maybe he senses something in her, or maybe he's just smarter than we think. Later, Sawyer found Ellie in the tack room, coiling ropes. The girl worked methodically, like she had done it before. You ever been around horses before? Sawyer asked. Ellie nodded. There was one at Mom's friend's place. He was mean, but not Dusty. Sawyer hesitated, then sat beside her. What do you think makes him different? Ellie looked up, green eyes luminous in the dim light. He doesn't talk, but he hears everything. Sawyer blinked. That sounds familiar. And in that small, shared silence, something shifted. That night, the air was unusually warm for October. Sawyer sat on the porch, a mug of coffee in her hands. Ellie joined her, barefoot, wrapped in a blanket. Dusty stood in the moonlit pasture, tail swishing, head lifted toward the stars. Ellie didn't say much, but before she went inside, she looked at her grandmother and asked softly, "Can we keep him?" Sawyer didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were on the horse, who, in that silver blue light, looked almost otherworldly. "If he chooses to stay," she said, "he stays." The late afternoon sun in northern Arizona was unrelenting, baking the red clay beneath Sawyer's boots as she secured the paddock gate. Dusty stood just beyond the fence, his coat now a cleaner shade of silver gray, though the stubborn streaks of red dust still clung to his legs. His injured leg had healed remarkably well, thanks to weeks of care and trust building. These days, he moved with a smooth, deliberate grace, the wildness in his step tamed not by force but by quiet understanding. Ellie was perched nearby on a low stool, sketch pad resting on her knees. She wasn't drawing today, just watching, observing. That had become part of her routine. Sawyer had stopped asking what she was thinking weeks ago. Ellie would speak when she was ready, and when she did, it was usually something worth hearing. The sound of tires crunching over gravel drew their attention. a jet-black truck pulled up just outside the ranch gate, the shine of chrome catching the sunlight like a threat. The driver's door swung open, and a tall man stepped out, his posture exuding confidence that bordered on arrogance. Jackson Maddox. He was in his late 30s, with a thick jawline, golden brown hair slicked back with more care than necessary, and a pair of aviator sunglasses he didn't bother removing. Dressed in spotless dark jeans, polished boots, and a pale blue button-down tucked in too neatly, he looked like a walking billboard for elite horsemanship. A silver belt buckle gleamed like a sheriff's badge, etched with the name of his ranch, Maddox Quarterstock and Performance Line. Sawyer's jaw set. "Didn't think your boots had ever touched dirt this red, Maddox." Jackson grinned, stepping closer. "Heard a rumor," he said, his voice like oil on dry wood, "that you picked up some stray from a ditch and think he's worth something." Ellie stood, arms crossed. Sawyer didn't flinch. "He's more horse than most of your overbred champions." Jackson removed his sunglasses finally, revealing blue eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "Which is why I'm here," he said, pulling a glossy invitation from his jacket pocket. "We're hosting the annual Santa Fe Horsemanship Showcase. Thought you might want a seat. Maybe show the world what a dusty war vet and her mangy Mustang can do." The words landed with sugar-coated venom. Ellie bristled. "Why invite us if you think we're trash?" Jackson gave her a sidelong glance, tone unchanged. "Because even the best shows need comic relief." Sawyer took the invitation, barely glancing at it. "We'll think about it." Jackson smirked. "I hope you do. It'll be fun to watch." With a mock tip of his hat, he turned and walked back to his truck, his boots barely stirring the dust he so clearly disdained. After he drove off, silence settled again. Ellie spoke first. "You should go." Sawyer looked at her. "You heard what he said. Exactly why you should go." Ellie's voice was firm, her green eyes flashing. "Dusty's not Rackrui. He listens, he learns, he trusts." Sawyer studied her granddaughter for a long moment, then turned toward the paddock. Dusty was watching them both, one ear twitching, his stance relaxed yet alert. That evening, Ellie disappeared into the house early. Sawyer assumed she was sketching again, or maybe reading. But she didn't know that Ellie had taken something else with her, an old phone Sawyer barely used. On it were a few short clips Ellie had recorded over the past weeks. Dusty weaving through cones made from overturned buckets, responding to whispered commands, side-passing with ease, and, most mesmerizing, standing perfectly still, while Ellie touched his muzzle with her forehead. Ellie uploaded the videos to a horse lover social media page under the title, "The Mustang That Listens to Whispers." Within 2 days, the video had 12,000 views, then 20,000, then 50,000. Comments poured in, "This can't be real. Who trained this beauty? Is this a rescue horse? I'm crying. This is what horsemanship should look like." Ellie said nothing to Sawyer. Not yet. She wanted her grandmother to decide to compete not because of internet fame, but because she believed Dusty was worth it. Sawyer, meanwhile, stood alone in the paddock that night. Dusty was calm, his breath fogging in the cool air. The stars burned overhead, as bright and vast as any Afghan sky. She touched Dusty's shoulder. "If we do this, we do it my way," she murmured. The next morning began with a change. Sawyer led Dusty into the open field behind the barn, the grass dry but firm beneath his hooves. No saddle, no bit, just a rope loosely slung around his neck. They started slowly. Shoulder yields, backing up with a shift of her weight, a slight press at his flank to indicate a turn. No voice commands, only body language. Dusty responded like he'd been waiting for this. Ellie watched from the fence, wide-eyed. She took notes in a journal Ray had given her. She scribbled phrases like "tail flick means frustration" and "tilts ears before every step." As the days passed, their routine sharpened. Sawyer never raised her voice, never used a whip. Just presence, repetition, and respect. She let Dusty guide some sessions. When he hesitated, she stopped. When he offered more, she rewarded with a gentle touch or moment of stillness. On the 5th day of training, Ray showed up unannounced. She leaned on the fence, arms crossed, a rare smile on her lips. "Didn't think you were the showcase type," Ray called out. Sawyer shrugged. "I'm not." Ray tilted her head toward Dusty. "He might be." Ray hadn't come alone this time. At her side stood a girl of about 17, slender, athletic, with dark curly hair tied into a ponytail and a serious, competitive glint in her eyes. She wore breeches and a windbreaker from the State Youth Equestrian League. "This is Nina Ortega," Ray said. "She's one of my students, rides jumpers. Thought she might want to see what real groundwork looks like." Nina studied Dusty silently for a minute, then said, "He moves like a dancer." Sawyer nodded. "He's never been taught to fear." That night, Ellie finally told Sawyer about the video, about the thousands of views, about the strangers who saw something rare in the horse no one else wanted. Sawyer listened quietly, then said, "Guess there's no hiding now." Ellie handed her a printed comment from a viewer. "This horse doesn't follow orders, he follows heart." And maybe that was all the reason Sawyer needed. The road to Santa Fe stretched like an old scar across the desert, sun-bleached and broken, with mirages dancing on the horizon like ghosts. Sawyer gripped the wheel of her battered Ford truck, jaw tight, knuckles white. In the passenger seat, Ellie sat cross-legged, earbuds in, sketchpad balanced against her knee, though her pencil hadn't moved in 20 minutes. Dusty traveled behind them in the makeshift trailer, a creaking contraption held together with bolts, rope, and Sawyer's stubbornness. Every jolt over cracked asphalt made the frame rattle like a death rattle. It had been 4 hours since they left the ranch, the last 2 through desolation. No gas stations, no towns, just dust and the occasional saguaro cactus standing like sentinels. The temperature needle on the dashboard began to twitch upward. "Not now," Sawyer muttered. A hiss erupted beneath the hood. The engine groaned, then sputtered into silence. The truck coasted for another 30 yards before it gave up altogether. Sawyer pulled to the shoulder, steam hissing from the hood. "Hell!" Ellie pulled her earbuds out. "What happened?" "Overheated, or worse." They stepped out into the dry furnace of the desert. A wave of heat slammed into them, thick and punishing. Sawyer popped the hood, only to recoil at the rush of steam. "No cell signal," Ellie said, holding up the phone. "We're dead out here." Sawyer surveyed the landscape, red sand, cracked earth, and a horizon that offered no salvation. Dusty snorted from the trailer, stamping a hoof. The sound was steady, not panicked, but it carried urgency. 2 hours passed. They sat in the narrow strip of shade beside the truck, sipping the last of their water in tiny mouthfuls. Dusty grew restless. He pawed at the floor and shook his head, the heat pressing in around him like a threat. Ellie leaned against the trailer, whispering to him through the slats. Then, like a shimmer of hope rising from the dust, a hum broke the silence. A truck, old but sturdy, came bouncing down the cracked road, a camper shell rattling on its back. The truck pulled over, and the engine cut. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was in his early 60s, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin and long salt and pepper hair tied in a low ponytail. His clothes were practical: denim shirt, tan work pants, worn boots, and he moved with the ease of someone used to being alone. His eyes were gray, the kind that had seen too much, and he walked with a subtle limp. "Trouble?" he asked, voice gravelly but kind. Sawyer straightened. "Water pump's gone, engines cooked, trailers overheating, horses got maybe another hour before he collapses." The man walked toward the trailer, peered in, then nodded slowly. "Name's Dr. Miles Ridge," he said. "Veterinarian. Or at least I was. Haven't had a clinic in years. Mind if I take a look at the horse?" Sawyer's posture shifted. She gave a small nod. "He's called Dusty." Miles approached the trailer with a practiced calm. Dusty pinned his ears for a moment, then tilted his head, nostrils flaring. The horse didn't shy away. Instead, he blinked slowly. "He's got a steady heart," Miles murmured. "That's a good sign, but the heat'll kill him if we don't get him somewhere soon." Miles turned back toward his camper. "I've got water, enough to cool him in your radiator, but we need to find better transport." Sawyer hesitated. "We're heading to Santa Fe, Showcase." Miles raised a brow. "You don't look like the Showcase type." Sawyer cracked a dry smile. "Neither does he." They cooled Dusty with wet rags and poured water over his back, while Miles siphoned from his own tank into the radiator. The truck grumbled back to life for a moment, but the dashboard lights flared again. "No good," Miles said. "You might crawl another mile, but not much more." It was then that a new rumble came from the horizon. A sleek, dark red horse trailer crested the road behind them. Chrome-plated, spotless, bearing the polished logo of Maddox Quarterstock. As it pulled up and stopped, Sawyer swore under her breath. The back door opened, and Trent Barrow stepped out, a longtime Maddox handler. He was in his late 20s, lean, sharp-featured, with perfectly parted black hair and a clipboard always tucked under his arm. Trent was the kind of man who made everything look like a task, even a smile. "Well, well," he said, eyeing the Calhoun truck. "Heard you'd be on the road today. Guess you didn't make it too far." Sawyer bit back a reply. Ellie, however, stepped forward. "Dusty's overheated. We need transport." Trent looked at the trailer. "We've got room. Boss said if you broke down, we could pick you up. Said it was the neighborly thing to do." Sawyer's lips thinned. Generous of him. Trent opened the side ramp and gestured. "You want your horse in or not?" Miles glanced at Sawyer. "He'll be safe in there. Cool. Ventilated." Sawyer looked to Dusty, who had stepped forward slightly, sensing movement. She opened the trailer and led him toward the Maddox rig. Dusty paused at the foot of the ramp, sniffing the unfamiliar surface. Then he looked back at Sawyer. Just one glance, clear and still. Like a question, like a promise. "You'll be all right," she said softly. "I'll be close." Dusty entered the Maddox trailer without a fuss. Trent sealed the door behind him. Miles handed Sawyer a bottle of water and leaned against his truck. "You Calhoun?" Sawyer paused. "Yeah, you knew my father?" Miles nodded. "Jim and I served together in Nam. He was a damn good medic, saved my life once." His voice grew quieter. "I lost my son a few years back. After that I started drifting. Been on the road since, but I still help where I can." Sawyer studied him. "You helped us." Miles shrugged. "Some debts never really get paid back." He gave Ellie a small smile. "Take care of that Mustang. He's not ordinary." With that, he climbed into his truck and drove off, kicking up dust in his wake. Ellie climbed into the Maddox rig with Sawyer, sitting just behind Dusty's stall. She placed a hand on the wall where his shoulder leaned. His breathing was calm, steady. The hum of the engine vibrated through the floor. "He looked at you like he knew you'd come back," Ellie whispered. Sawyer nodded. "That's what makes him different." The Santa Fe showcase grounds glimmered like a mirage under the silver gleam of the moon. Rows of temporary stables stretched in rigid formation, lit dimly by overhead floodlights that buzzed and flickered against the still night. Crickets chirped somewhere beyond the fences, but closer to the horses, only the soft rustle of hay and the occasional snort broke the silence. Dusty stood in stall 53, assigned to Sawyer by the event officials at the far edge of the stable rows, away from the premium corners where Maddox's horses were pampered under misting fans. Despite the modest space, Dusty remained calm. His coat shimmered under a layer of sweat and dust, but his posture was relaxed, even regal. Until it wasn't. Ellie was the first to notice. She had slipped out of the small bunk above their trailer, clutching her sketchbook and a fleece blanket. Her plan was simple: spend an hour drawing Dusty under the moonlight before bed. But as she approached the stall, her heart skipped. Dusty's usual calm had vanished. He stomped restlessly, shaking his head and biting at the straw. His breath came in fast huffs. Ellie froze, instinct gripping her spine. "Dusty?" she whispered, stepping to the edge of the gate. He turned toward her, his mouth flecked with foam, his eyes wide, with a wild edge she had never seen before. He bit at the corner of the feed trough, then lifted his head and slammed it once into the stall door. Ellie gasped and reached for the latch. The first thing that hit her when she opened the gate was the smell, not manure or sweat, but something sharp, artificial, a chemical scent clinging to the straw. She crouched and sifted her fingers through the bedding. Some patches were dry and normal, but in a concentrated pile near the corner, the straw was darker, slightly damp and sticky. Ellie lifted a clump to her nose and flinched. Someone had tampered with it. She ran back to the trailer, waking Sawyer with a firm shake. "Something's wrong with Dusty. And the straw, it smells weird, like turpentine." Sawyer, still half-dressed in her denim work shirt, moved fast. Her military reflexes kicked in, boots laced in under 20 seconds, hair twisted into a quick bun. She followed Ellie back to the stall, crouched, and sniffed the hay herself. Her jaw clenched. "Get me the water bucket and gloves." Under the harsh glow of the floodlight, she poured clean water into a metal tub and mixed in a pinch of salt from her travel kit. Gently, she coaxed Dusty's head down and rinsed the inside of his mouth with a soaked cloth, wiping away the foam and watching for signs of blistering. "It's an irritant," she murmured, his tongue swollen a bit. "He didn't ingest much, but it's enough to throw him off tomorrow." Ellie looked stricken. "Do you think Jackson did this?" Sawyer didn't answer. She simply gathered a sample of the straw and sealed it in a resealable bag from her kit. Then she handed the bag to Ellie. "You go, find Miles." Ellie didn't hesitate. She dashed across the gravel pathways past sleeping trailers and horses resting in the low light. She found Dr. Miles Ridge leaning against the side of his camper, sipping coffee from a thermos. He wore a battered flannel jacket, his silver hair loose around his shoulders. "Miles," she panted. "Someone poisoned Dusty's straw. We need help." He moved quickly, taking the bag, sniffing once. "Something oily. Could be methyl salicylate, maybe kerosene-based. I'll test it." Back at the stall, Miles examined Dusty under his pocket flashlight. "You rinsed early. Good. His vitals are strong. No long-term damage, but if he'd slept in this much longer..." He didn't finish the sentence. Sawyer folded her arms. "Any way to prove it was planted?" "Not without a witness," Miles replied. "But if we find more of it in other stables, maybe. Or if someone talks." "Someone always talks," Sawyer muttered. As Miles retreated to run a basic chemical test in his camper, Ellie remained behind. She set up her folding stool outside the stall and pulled her sketchbook back into her lap. She couldn't sleep, not with the image of Dusty thrashing in her head. So instead, she drew. The lines formed slowly. Dusty's stance in the glow of the moonlight, the slight flare of his nostrils, the sweat-darkened fur along his chest, and the look in his eye, not wild anymore, but watchful, wise, enduring. A warrior in silence. She titled the sketch "The Quiet Soldier." A soft voice stirred her from her focus. "Beautiful work." Ellie turned. Rachel Maddox, Jackson's younger sister, stood nearby. She was tall and willowy, with red hair tied in a braid down her back and freckles that stood out against her pale skin. Unlike her brother, Rachel had always moved like she didn't want to be seen, even though she often was. "I'm not supposed to be here," Rachel said, crouching beside her. "But I heard something earlier. I think someone from my brother's crew snuck into your stall tonight." Ellie's eyes widened. "Did you see who?" Rachel hesitated. "No, but Trent, the handler? He left the fire pit early, and when he came back, he smelled like thinner." Ellie swallowed. "Could you tell the officials?" Rachel looked down. "I would, but if I accuse him, it'll blow back on my family. Jackson would ruin me, but I'll find another way to help." Then, softly, she added, "Your horse is different. The way he looks at you, it's not obedience, it's understanding." Ellie nodded slowly. "We don't command him, we ask." As Rachel disappeared into the shadows, Ellie turned back to Dusty. He had calmed again, resting with his head lowered toward the trough. She stayed outside his stall until dawn. The Santa Fe arena buzzed with anticipation. The air smelled of leather polish, freshly churned dirt, and a tension so taut it was almost musical. Riders dressed in immaculate jackets trotted past the judge's panel. Trainers barked last-minute commands. The audience, a patchwork of equestrian elites and curious onlookers, filled the stands with restless energy. Everyone was here for the same reason: the final performance. Sawyer Calhoun stood just beyond the tunnel gate, her eyes fixed on the golden morning light spilling across the arena sand. She wore a crisp white shirt tucked neatly into dark riding jeans. Her boots, though worn, were polished to a quiet shine. Her silver-gray hair was braided tight, and her face, sun-scorched and angular, showed no fear, only focus. Beside her stood Dusty, the Mustang with a silver coat dappled in stormy gray. There was no bridle on his head, no reins to hold, only a simple rope halter rested loose around his neck, for safety, but not control. Ellie watched from the sidelines, biting her lip. Her hand gripped her sketchbook so hard the pages bent, but she didn't look down. Her eyes were locked on the gate. Miles Ridge stood behind her, arms folded, face unreadable. The announcer's voice echoed through the loudspeakers. Representing Stall 53, Sawyer Calhoun, riding Dusty. A murmur swept the stands. Stall 53? That was the neglected corner. The one for the oddballs, the rejects. The arena hushed. Sawyer and Dusty stepped into the light. A single acoustic guitar began to play. A slow, melancholic tune, like something whispered from an old porch in the desert. Sawyer walked beside Dusty to the center of the arena, then paused. She touched her hand to his neck, leaned close, and whispered something only he could hear. Then she stepped back. Dusty stood alone and began to move. The audience leaned forward as the Mustang lifted a hoof and traced a perfect arc across the sand. No commands, no visible cue, just the silent language between horse and human. He trotted in a tight circle, then spun in place on his haunches, what riders called a pirouette, a move that took most horses years to learn and most trainers whips to teach. Sawyer didn't move. She stood at the center, her body relaxed, her eyes focused. Occasionally, she shifted her weight, just slightly. A lean of the shoulder, a turn of the wrist, and Dusty responded. With each silent cue, he performed a new maneuver, a side pass, a collected canter, a slow-motion pivot. He stopped on a dime and turned with the grace of a dancer. By the time Dusty raised himself into a half-rear, a move once trained into Spanish war horses for battle display, the audience was holding its breath. Then came the final gesture. Sawyer stepped toward him, raised one hand to her chest, then extended it gently to the side. Dusty bowed. He lowered his head, bent one foreleg, and sank into a graceful kneel, like a knight acknowledging a queen. The crowd erupted. It started with a single cheer, then multiplied into thunderous applause. People leapt to their feet, phones were raised. Some older spectators wiped tears from their eyes. A child in the front row shouted, "That horse is magic." In the judge's box, an older man in his late 70s adjusted his spectacles. He was Thomas Ellsworth, a retired equine geneticist turned guest judge. His snow-white mustache twitched with curiosity. He leaned toward the head judge and whispered, "Get me a closer look at that Mustang after this. There's something unusual about his gait." The announcer's voice returned, straining over the applause. Ladies and gentlemen, Sawyer Calhoun and Dusty, with an unbridled performance unlike anything we've seen this decade. Backstage, Jackson Maddox clenched his jaw so tight the veins on his temple bulged. Dressed in an embroidered navy jacket and snakeskin boots, he was flanked by his handler, Trent Barrow. Jackson's smile never quite reached his eyes as he watched the applause roll like thunder over Sawyer's exit. "She's got them eating out of her hand," he sneered. But just then, an official in a navy vest approached. He was stocky, with a clipboard tucked under his arm and a badge reading Event Oversight Committee. Behind him walked Rachel Maddox, her red hair pulled back, face pale but determined. "Mr. Maddox," the official said, voice crisp, "we've received a formal report of suspected tampering with another competitor's horse stall. Combined with statements provided by multiple witnesses, we're launching a preliminary investigation." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Witnesses?" Rachel stepped forward. "I saw Trent leaving the feed storage late last night. He had something in his hand. It wasn't his equipment." Trent's face drained of color. "She's lying." Miles Ridge stepped up from the sidelines, holding a sealed plastic bag. "This is a sample from stall 53. I ran a field test. It contains petroleum-based irritants. I'm willing to testify to that effect." The murmuring crowd near the back began to turn. "I didn't authorize anything," Jackson growled. "This is slander." But the event official raised a hand. "We're not asking for your opinion, Mr. Maddox. We're initiating a full review. Effective immediately, your entry is disqualified pending investigation. Please remove your horses from the grounds." Gasps echoed from onlookers. Jackson turned to Trent, who was frozen, lips trembling. "You useless," Rachel cut in, voice shaking but steady. "You taught us to win, Jackson, but not at the cost of decency." Back in the arena, Thomas Ellsworth stepped up to Sawyer as she walked Dusty out of the ring. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, "but would you mind if I took a few samples? I believe your horse might be something very rare." Sawyer gave him a curious look. "Rare?" Ellsworth smiled. "I worked for 20 years with a conservation program for Spanish warhorse lineages. Most of them were thought to have gone extinct in North America. But the way Dusty moves, the structure of his pasterns, the musculature in his hindquarters, there's a chance he's descended from Andalusians, a very old and specialized strain." Sawyer blinked. "He was a rescue. Found him near the Red Cliffs outside Flagstaff. Starving." Ellsworth's eyes lit up. "Then it would be a miracle. A horseline thought lost to time, surviving in the wild, only to be rediscovered by a veteran with nothing left to prove." He paused, hand hovering over Dusty's shoulder. "This," he said, "is history." The morning light over Taos Valley arrived slow and golden, casting long fingers across the hills like an old friend reaching out. Where once there was only wind-bruised silence, a gentle hum of life now stirred among the wild sagebrush and repurposed wood fences. Here stood Calhoun Ridge Sanctuary. Not a showplace, not a business, but something holier in its simplicity. The ranch house was modest, painted white with green shutters faded by sun. The stable was newly reinforced, lined with cedar planks and filled with the soft shuffling of rescued hooves. Signs hand-painted by children marked paddocks with names like Willow, Biscuit, and Echo. At the heart of it all stood Dusty, coat silver gray like rain-washed stone, his eyes deep and watchful. He had been a ghost once. Now, he was the soul of this place. Sawyer Calhoun sat beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree, a steaming mug of black coffee in one hand, her other resting on the leather-bound journal open in her lap. Her skin bore the hue of desert years, sun-kissed, weather-worn, real. She wore her old military boots out of habit, laced tight, though now she spent her days not in command, but in quiet service. She was writing. After decades of silence, the words came. Slowly at first, 1 page a week, maybe 2. But now they poured like spring thaw. The journal told stories from Afghanistan, from base clinics lit by dim bulbs and mortar sirens, from dusty hallways where lives teetered on the edge of steel and blood. But it also told of Dusty, of Ellie, of healing. She wasn't writing for publication. She was writing to make peace. Across the pasture, Ellie raced after 2 younger children, both no older than 8. One boy, thin and wiry with restless energy, laughed as he ducked under the corral fence. The girl trailing behind him moved slower. Her left arm bore a pale scar that ran from wrist to elbow. Her name was Nina, a child placed with her aunt after losing her parents in a car accident. Nina hadn't spoken a full sentence in nearly a year, but now she smiled. Not at people, at Dusty. Ellie Calhoun, now 15, had grown into her purpose like a sapling stretching toward sunlight. Her curls were tied up in a messy bun, her hands perpetually smudged with charcoal and hay. She wore flannel shirts with sleeves rolled high and cargo pants with brush tips poking from the pockets. "Easy," she whispered as she approached Dusty, who stood motionless beside Nina. "Let her come to you." The Mustang didn't move. Nina stepped closer. Her fingers trembled, then lifted, brushing the soft hair beneath Dusty's jaw. When Dusty bent his head lower just slightly, the girl's lips parted. "Hi." It was a whisper, but it was her first word in months. Ellie blinked hard, turned away to hide it, then quickly pulled her sketchbook and began to draw. A girl, a horse, a moment of trust reborn in silence. Nearby, Miles Ridge hammered the final plank into place along a new therapy pen. He was a tall man in his early 60s with shoulders that had once been broad and strong, now softened with age and sun. His beard was streaked with gray, and he always wore a leather hat that had survived more storms than most roofs. Miles had once been a veterinarian for rodeo circuits, then drifted after a divorce left him hollow. When he reconnected with Sawyer, his father's old war buddy's daughter, he hadn't planned to stay. But now he ran the sanctuary's wellness program, providing both animal care and mental health support for visiting veterans. One of them, Rick Torres, arrived that afternoon. A former Marine, Rick had lost a leg in Fallujah and part of himself with it. He walked with a crutch and a constant scowl, his eyes darting like someone still expecting ambush. But when he met Dusty, his expression changed. Dusty approached slowly, not with showmanship, with understanding. "He doesn't pity you," Sawyer said, standing beside Rick. "He sees you." Rick grunted. "Feels like he's looking through me." "Maybe he is," she replied. Over the weeks that followed, Rick began coming every morning. Not to talk, to brush Dusty, to refill water buckets, to stand in the shade and say nothing. But in that silence, something softened. Sawyer watched all this unfold from her porch. Each smile that broke through Nina's silence, each laugh that escaped Ellie's lips, each man like Rick who came in shattered and left just a little less broken. She had received offers, book deals, show tours, magazine spreads. One company wanted to license Dusty's name for a new breed registry. Another offered a feature documentary. But she declined them all. This place wasn't for show. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, Ellie curled up beside Sawyer on the porch swing. "Do you miss the spotlight?" she asked softly. Sawyer shook her head. "Never really belonged there." "You do here." That made Sawyer smile. "I'm proud of you, Ellie," she said, voice tight. "You're stronger than I ever was at your age." Ellie leaned her head on her grandmother's shoulder. "That's only because you taught me how." As night settled, Dusty remained in the field, silhouetted by the last gold rays. He didn't need a fence. He never wandered. He belonged here, where children whispered to him, where soldiers touched his mane with reverent hands, where healing wasn't preached but lived. Sawyer looked down at her journal. She wrote one last sentence before closing it for the night. We were both broken once, but in each other, we found a reason to stay. Life is full of broken things, fractured hearts, forgotten horses, lonely souls wandering through the deserts of grief. But sometimes, in the quiet places where the world has stopped looking, God still plants a miracle. Dusty was never meant to be a champion. He was cast off, like so many of us feel in our hardest seasons. But through love, patience, and faith, he became a living testament that healing is not only possible, it's divine. And Sawyer, who had walked through war, found that the greatest battles are often won not on fields of fire, but in barns of silence and fields of second chances. This story isn't just about a horse or a war veteran, it's about you. About the parts of your life that feel too bruised to be used again. About the days you feel overlooked and the prayers you think go unheard. But take heart. God sees, God restores, and God still performs miracles. If you believe he is still writing redemption stories like this one, comment Amen. If this story moved your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, tales of light rising in the darkest places. And may God bless you and keep you wherever your path leads next.